For over 40 years, I was the pillar of my family. I worked tirelessly to ensure my children never lacked anything. I sacrificed everything, my time, my dreams, and even my health, to give them the best life possible. But the day I needed help, they turned their backs on me. What I did next? Oh, you won't believe it. Stay with me until the end. My name is Isabel, and if there's one thing I've always believed in, it's that a mother's love must be unconditional. I thought that being a mother meant always being available, always putting my children first. I believed that if I did everything right, my family would always stand by my side. From the moment I held my firstborn in my arms, I made a silent pact with myself. I would give him everything within my reach, and even the impossible. I would become the mother I never had, the mother who would ensure that nothing was ever missing, the mother who would love unconditionally, and, in return, be loved the same way. Little did I know that life does not always reward those who sacrifice too much. The beginning of everything. I married very young, at 22, to Richard. He was a charismatic man, the kind who could captivate anyone with an easy smile. A dreamer, full of grandiose plans, he spoke of big opportunities, of businesses we would start together, of a life full of prosperity. At first, I was completely swept away by his vision. He would say that our future would be bright, that we were destined to live comfortably. I wanted to believe it. I needed to believe it. But time showed me that dreaming is easy, building requires effort. And the effort was left only to me. The truth was that Richard's dreams never included real responsibilities. While he talked about his next big project, his revolutionary idea, the business that would finally succeed, the bills kept arriving, and someone had to pay them. That someone was always me. The arrival of the children. At 25, I became a mother for the first time. I still remember the first time I heard his cry, the weight of his tiny body in my arms, the warmth of his skin against mine. At that moment, my life changed forever. When I looked into his little eyes, I felt overtaken by a silent promise. I would never let him lack anything. 2 years later, Lucas was born. And then, Sophia. With each new child, my heart expanded, but so did my responsibilities. While other mothers could afford to spend afternoons playing with their children, I was racing against time, trying to balance work and motherhood. I woke up before the sun and left home when the world was still dark. Many times, I didn't even get to see their little faces before leaving. I worked as a nurse, then as a caregiver. Double shifts, extra shifts, weekends, holidays. There was no Christmas, no birthdays, no Mother's Day for me. There were bills to pay, schools to maintain, food to put on the table. For me, motherhood was not just about love. It was about sacrifice. The sacrifices I made. And Richard? Richard never changed. Every month, it was a new idea. A new project. A new excuse. But money? He never brought any home. And me? I couldn't afford to dream. My dreams were pushed to the back of a drawer, stored in a corner of my soul, along with everything I wanted to be but couldn't. While Richard dreamed, I worked. While Richard talked, I solved problems. While Richard allowed himself to live, I was only surviving. I learned to fend for myself. When Daniel needed a new school uniform and Richard didn't have money at the moment, I sold my wedding ring and bought it for him. When Lucas wanted a birthday party and Richard said it wasn't a priority, I used my tips and made a small cake at home. When Sophia asked for a dress for her graduation and Richard forgot to buy it, I took an extra shift at the hospital and bought it myself. I never complained. I never allowed myself to cry. I always told myself, it will be worth it. When they grow up, they will understand. When they become adults, they will recognize everything I did for them. And then, The years passed. Children grow up. But what's left for mothers? Suddenly, my children didn't need me the same way anymore. Daniel left for college and barely called. Lucas got a job and was rarely home. Sophia started dating seriously and preferred to go out with her boyfriend rather than spend time with me. But I told myself, this is how it's supposed to be. They are growing up. They are building their own lives. And even when I felt a sting of pain looking at the empty dining table, I convinced myself that this was natural. But do you know what never changed? Richard. At 45, he was still jumping from job to job, always waiting for the business of the century to appear. One day, he came home saying he was going to start an investment company. The next, he wanted to sell products online. The month after that, he was convinced real estate was the way to make money. This time, it will work, Isabel. I know it sounds crazy, but trust me. But it never worked. It never did. Until, one day, he simply stopped trying. The day he left me. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was just another morning. I had just come home from a night shift at the hospital. My eyes were heavy with exhaustion, my entire body ached. I just wanted to sleep. But when I opened the door to our house, I felt something was wrong. Richard's clothes were missing from the closet. His shoes were gone. His computer was no longer on the desk. And then, I found the note. A crumpled piece of paper, left on the table. Isabel, I have to go. I can't live this monotonous life anymore. I want to be free. You have always been strong, you'll be fine. Thank you for everything. Richard. That was it. After more than 20 years together. After everything we built, or rather, after everything I built. He just left. And me? I didn't have time to grieve. I didn't have time to cry. I didn't have time to be angry or ask myself where I went wrong. Because life didn't give me that option. I still had bills to pay. I still had children to support. I still had a house to keep. So, I took a deep breath, folded that note, and threw it in the trash. Just one more thing I need to overcome. And I moved on. Little did I know. The real abandonment was yet to come. Until one day, my life collapsed. For more than 4 decades, I was the invisible pillar of my family. I woke up before the sun and only returned home when the moon was already shining in the sky. The hospital had become my second home. Double shifts, night shifts, weekends with no rest. All so that my family would never have to go through what I had endured as a child. I always took pride in being the woman who could handle it all. I couldn't afford to fail because, if I failed, who would hold everything together? I carried the house, the finances, the education of my children, all while my husband, Richard, switched jobs like changing clothes. The weight of a lonely marriage. At first, I tried to have conversations. Richard always had an excuse ready. If I mentioned the overdue bills, he would smile, pull me into an embrace, and say, "You're so good with money, Isabel. I'm more creative. We balance each other, don't we?" Balance? The only balance that existed was my effort compensating for his irresponsibility. While I was on my feet for 14 hours straight, taking care of patients in the hospital, Richard was sitting at some bar, chatting with friends. While I sweated to pay the bills, he said he was waiting for the right opportunity. And deep down, I accepted it. Why? Because I believed it was my duty to keep the household running. I saw other wives complaining about their husbands and thought, at least Richard is affectionate. At least he's not violent. At least he's still here. But being physically present is not the same as truly being there. I didn't have a partner. I had another person to take care of. the sacrifice for my children. If there was one thing I was always sure of, it was that my children would always come first. So, I sacrificed myself for them. When Daniel, my eldest, said he wanted to study business administration, I felt both proud and terrified. How would I pay for college? Richard, of course, didn't even try to help. He said that a degree didn't guarantee success. I know plenty of people with college degrees who make nothing. Daniel might as well start his own business instead of wasting years studying. But I refused to accept that. I opened my small jewelry box, the only valuable keepsakes I had from my mother, and sold every piece. My hands trembled as I handed the gold over to the jeweler. But when I saw Daniel holding his diploma, I knew it had been worth it. I always told myself, a mother's sacrifice is never in vain. But sometimes, it is. The second sacrifice, Lucas's dream. When Lucas wanted to study abroad, the story repeated itself. Richard dismissed the idea, saying our son should learn to make it on his own. So, what did I do? I took on more hospital shifts. I worked all day, slept 2 or 3 hours, then went back to the hospital before sunrise. I remember one particular night. I was so exhausted that when I got home, I collapsed on the couch still wearing my uniform. When I opened my eyes, Richard was snoring in bed, and the sun had already risen. I didn't exist to him. I was invisible. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that Lucas would have the opportunity one never had. Sophia's wedding, the final blow. My daughter had always been my weak spot. Maybe because she was the youngest, maybe because she was a girl, maybe because, deep down, I thought she would be the only one to truly understand my sacrifices. When Sophia announced she was getting married, I felt both joy and dread. She wanted a grand wedding. With a banquet, live music, and a princess-style dress. And, as always, Richard didn't help. So, I did what I had always done, I made it happen. I cut expenses. I took extra shifts. I saved every penny I could. I still remember the night before her wedding. I was sitting at the kitchen table, organizing the bills. My hands trembled with exhaustion. I had no more strength. But I looked at the white dress hanging in the corner and thought, it will be worth it. And it was. On the wedding day, when I saw my daughter walking down the aisle, radiant, smiling, I felt that all my sacrifices had a purpose. If only I had known that I would be forgotten shortly after. The silence after years of struggle. The years passed, and my children no longer needed me. I watched other women my age playing with their grandchildren, receiving daily calls from their children. And me? I watched my house grow emptier and emptier. At first, I tried to keep in touch. I called Daniel, but he was always busy. I tried to meet Lucas for coffee, but he never had time. I sent messages to Sophia, but her replies were always short and cold. And suddenly, I realized something painful. I spent my whole life being the foundation of this family. But the moment I stopped serving them, they no longer needed me. The first sign that something was wrong. I still remember the day I realized my health was failing. It was during a night shift. I was organizing patient files when I felt a sharp, searing pain in my knees. At first, I ignored it. I kept walking, pushing through the pain. But the next morning, when I tried to get out of bed, my legs wouldn't respond. A wave of panic washed over me. I went to the doctor. The diagnosis: severe arthritis. I would need surgery. Months of physical therapy. My career as a nurse was coming to an end. For the first time in decades, I needed help. So, I picked up the phone and called Daniel. Then Lucas. Then Sophia. And each answer I received felt like a stab to the heart. Is this the life I built? That was the moment when my illusion shattered. My children, the ones I sacrificed everything for, weren't there for me. They didn't want to be bothered. They didn't want to spend money on me. They didn't want to help. I always thought that when I needed them, they would come. But now, I knew the truth. I was alone. And for the first time in my life, I realized that no one cared. I spent my whole life solving everyone's problems. But now, there was no one to save me. The pain started as a mild discomfort, a silent warning that something was wrong. For months, I ignored it. I was a nurse. I knew that years of hard work had taken their toll on my body, but I didn't have time to worry about that. Every step I took in the hospital became harder. Climbing stairs felt like torture. The pain throbbed in my knees, as if something inside them was about to snap. But I kept going. I always kept going. Until one day, my body simply gave up. The day everything changed. It was a regular morning, or at least it seemed like one. The hospital was busy, as always. I was attending to an elderly patient when I suddenly felt a sharp crack in my knees. A burning pain shot up my legs like an electric wave. My body weakened. I tried to hold onto the counter, but my hands were trembling. Then, everything happened in seconds. My vision darkened, my breath shortened. I collapsed. Right there, in the middle of the hospital, the woman who never stopped, who never rested, had fallen to the ground. Colleagues ran toward me, their voices echoing in my mind. I felt hands holding me, asking if I could move. I couldn't. I was taken to the emergency room, just as I had done for so many others. But this time, I was the patient. The diagnosis hit me like a punch to the stomach: severe arthritis. Years of relentless effort, endless shifts, and sacrifices had destroyed my joints to the point that I could no longer walk without pain. The only solution: surgery and months of physical therapy. My career was over. I would never again be able to stand for hours in a hospital. The work that had kept me alive had now abandoned me. And for the first time in my life, I needed help. The plea for help that changed everything. I had always been the one who fixed problems. The one who, when someone called in distress, always found a way. Now, for the first time, I was on the other side of the call. I picked up the phone and dialed Daniel, my eldest son. He answered on the third ring, his voice rushed. "Mom, I can't talk right now. I'm busy with the company. Surgery. Let's talk about it later. Talk about it later." I tried to explain, to tell him I needed help now, but he had already hung up. My heart sank, but I took a deep breath. Maybe Lucas, my second son, would be different. "Mom, I really wish I could help, but I just bought a new apartment. You know how things are tough right now." Tough? My mind spun. How many years had I supported this boy? How many sacrifices had I made so he could study abroad? I didn't want to believe it, so I called Sophia, my youngest, the daughter I thought would understand me the most. "Mom, I already have my own family to take care of. You've always been independent, can't you figure something out?" That sentence hurt more than the pain in my knees. I had always figured things out on my own. Yes, it was true. But now, I couldn't. I hung up the phone, my eyes burning with tears. My hands trembled. My chest ached. Reality hit me. My children were not going to help me. The children I raised alone. The children I sacrificed everything for. The children I gave the best of me. And now, I was no longer useful to them. The final blow, the moment that shattered my heart. I tried to justify it. I tried to convince myself that they were just busy, that they needed time to understand my situation. But then, I found out the truth. That same week, while I was alone at home, waiting for even the slightest bit of support, they were throwing a party. A big, luxurious party. And do you know who it was for? Richard. My ex-husband. The man who had abandoned me without looking back. The man who never paid a single bill. The man who never cared about anyone but himself. I saw the photos online. Champagne, laughter, hugs. My children, smiling at that man as if he had been the father they always wanted. Daniel was there. Lucas was there. Sophia was there. And me? I was forgotten. The moment of truth, I was never family to them. I sat on the couch, my hands shaking as I held my phone. I stared at those images, and I felt a knot form in my stomach. Suddenly, everything became clear. I was never family to them. I was a resource. I was the woman who paid the bills. I was the invisible pillar they walked over without realizing. And now that I couldn't give them anything anymore, they had nothing left to take from me. My children didn't love me. They loved what I did for them. The realization hit like a stone. And that stone crushed every last illusion I still had. The Isabel who believed that love was unconditional died that day. And in her place, a new Isabel began to rise. An Isabel who, for the first time in her life, was going to choose herself. I didn't know what I was going to do yet. I just knew that I would never be the same again. What comes next? This was the turning point of the protagonist. The moment when betrayal and abandonment became undeniable. This section amplifies the pain, the emotional shock, and the psychological impact of realizing that a lifetime of sacrifices was for nothing. Now, Isabel will no longer be the woman who gives everything to others. She will start giving everything to herself. And from this point forward, comes the most powerful part of the story, the rebirth of a woman who finally learns to live for herself. The days following that discovery were a blur of tears and pain. I had felt many kinds of pain in my life. The pain of exhaustion, of relentless fatigue, of hunger swallowed so that my children would never have to endure it. The pain of being forgotten by a husband who should have been my partner. The pain of watching the years slip away without ever truly living for myself. But this pain was different. This pain tore through me. It came from a heart that still believed it could be loved. The silence of an empty house. I tried to continue my routine. I got up, made my coffee, looked out the window. But everything felt empty. The silence in my house was deafening. Before, I comforted myself by saying my children were simply busy with their own lives, that they would visit soon, that they would remember me eventually. But now, I knew the truth. They didn't forget. They chose not to remember. A mother who had served her purpose. I tried not to think about it. But it was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them laughing, celebrating, hugging the man who had never done anything for them. And me? I had been nothing more than a stepping stone. A bridge that had carried them safely to where they wanted to go. And now, they no longer needed to cross that bridge. The day everything became clear. There was one day, in particular, that I will never forget. I was sitting at the edge of my bed, staring at my hands. The hands that had held my children when they were babies. The hands that had prepared so many meals, that had written so many checks, that had wiped away so many tears. Now, those same hands trembled with disappointment. I stood up and walked to the mirror. The woman staring back at me didn't look like me. What happened to me? My face was marked, not with lines of joy, but with wrinkles of worry. My eyes, once full of life, were dull, sunken, tired. My hair, once well kept, now lifeless, tied in a messy bun. I saw an entire lifetime of sacrifices reflected in that mirror. And for what? To end up alone. To be treated like a burden. To have been the mother who gave everything and received only abandonment in return. The birth of a new emotion. My eyes filled with tears. But this time, it wasn't sadness. It was anger. Anger at myself. I let this happen. I was the one who taught my children that I needed nothing. I was the one who let Richard believe he could do whatever he wanted because I would always fix it later. I was the one who accepted being invisible. But that ended now. I looked myself in the eyes and, in that moment, I made a promise. I will never again expect anything from anyone. I will never again sacrifice my life for people who would never do the same for me. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with an open notebook and a pen in hand. And for the first time, I wrote a plan that didn't involve anyone but myself. 1. Rewriting my life. The first step was to free myself from the chains of the past. I took the will I had written years ago and tore it into pieces. My children would inherit nothing. Why? Because money doesn't buy love. I would leave nothing for people who had treated me like nothing. Instead, I would donate everything to those who truly needed it. I had the chance to do something meaningful, to help women who had gone through stories like mine. So, I found a lawyer, and within a few days, everything was settled. My children no longer had any right to what was mine. 2. Freeing myself from the weight of the house. My house was a tomb. It held the echoes of a family that no longer existed. It held memories of smiles that had faded. It was too big for someone who now wanted to live lightly. I put the house up for sale and, in less than a month, moved into a smaller apartment. It was cozy, simple, but it was mine. And most importantly, it no longer carried the weight of the past. 3. Doing something for myself. What did I have left now? Life. A life I had never truly lived. So, I did something I never imagined I would do. I bought a plane ticket. For me. Alone. The world had always been an unfamiliar place to me. I had spent my life confined to the same streets, between my house and the hospital. Now, I wanted to see what was beyond that. At first, fear crept in. Would I be able to do this? Would I manage to travel alone? Was I being selfish? But then I reminded myself. If I don't do this for myself, no one will. So, I went. And for the first time in decades, I felt peace. The feeling of freedom. The first night of the trip was eye-opening. I was in a new city, in a modest but cozy hotel. I opened the window and felt the fresh breeze brush against my face. For the first time in decades, no one needed me. I had no children's bills to pay. I had no husband to support. I had no one expecting me to fix something. I was free. I picked up a book, one I had bought just for myself, and sat down to read. And with each page I turned, I realized something extraordinary. I still existed. I still had dreams. I could still start over. And I would. The beginning of a new Isabel. In the months that followed, I did things I had never imagined doing. I learned to paint. I took a cooking class. I started walking every morning, feeling the cool breeze touch my skin. I met people. Some were fleeting encounters, others became friends. And with each passing day, the Isabel that existed before she was just a mother, a wife, a provider, began to come back to life. The past? I didn't forget it. But it no longer defined me. My children. They could live their own lives. And now, I would finally live mine. The phone rang on an ordinary day. It was a sunny afternoon. I was sitting in a cafe, sipping my favorite tea, watching people stroll down the street. And then, I saw Lucas's name on my screen. For a brief moment, my heart skipped a beat. He never called. Since I had distanced myself, my children rarely tried to reach out. The last message I had received from Daniel was a cold, emotionless, happy birthday. And Sophia? She didn't even remember I existed. So why now? I answered. My son's voice, once so confident, now sounded different. Weak. Worried. Desperate. Mom, please, we need you. I could hear the fear in his tone, the urgency he was struggling to hide. For a split second, my mother's heart almost caved in. But then, Lucas began telling me what had happened. The price of ingratitude. Daniel's fall. Daniel, my eldest son, the one who always thought he was superior, had lost everything. His financial empire collapsed after a corruption scandal at his company. He had taken big risks, made reckless investments, and when the crisis hit, he found himself completely alone. The same friends who once surrounded him now ignored him. The same people who praised his brilliant business mind were now laughing behind his back. He lost his house, his cars, his precious status. And then, he remembered me. He remembered that once upon a time, there was a mother who always rescued her children. But was that mother still there? Lucas's debts. Lucas wasn't doing well either. The son who told me he couldn't help me because he was buying a new apartment was now drowning in debt. The economic crisis hit hard. His company had cut jobs, and he was one of the first to be laid off. Interest rates skyrocketed. Bills piled up. And then, he remembered he had a mother. The same mother he ignored when she needed him. Sophia's devastation. And Sophia. My baby girl, the light of my life. The daughter I did everything for, making sure she had a perfect life. Now, she was going through a brutal divorce. Her husband had cheated on her. Her fairy tale marriage had turned into a nightmare. And when she found herself alone, fragile, lost, she remembered there was a mother. The mother who had given her everything. The mother who had always been there. But now, that mother no longer existed. My response, the turning point. Lucas was still waiting for my answer. Mom, please. We need you. And that's when I realized it. For the first time, my children saw me as their salvation. But it wasn't out of love. It wasn't out of regret. They wanted me not because they loved me, but because now, they needed me. And so, with complete calm, I said, I'm sorry, children. But I can't help. You've always managed on your own, why not try a little harder now? And then, I hung up. I hung up the phone. And I felt no pain. No guilt. No regret. I felt free. For years, I had lived under the illusion that being a mother meant giving everything, expecting nothing in return. But now, I understood the truth. Giving everything without limits doesn't teach gratitude. It teaches dependence. I had taught my children that my help was infinite. And when I stopped giving, they didn't know what to do. But that wasn't my problem anymore. A new life begins. Today, I am a new woman. I am Isabel. Not the mother who sacrificed everything. Not the wife who held everything together alone. Not the nurse who spent sleepless nights taking care of others. Now, I am just me. The woman who wakes up without rushing. Who walks along the beach without thinking about unpaid bills. Who reads a book without being interrupted. Who travels without needing permission. And if there is one thing I've learned, it's this. Never sacrifice your happiness for people who would never do the same for you. And you? Have you ever been through something similar? How would you react in the protagonist's place? Tell me in the comments. And if you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel for more inspiring content. See you next time.